The day I turned 18, my parents handed me a cardboard box and a deadline. 3 months. That's all the time they gave me to pack up my entire life and get out of the only home I'd ever known. I still remember the way my mother's voice sounded so casual, like she was asking me to take out the trash instead of throwing me away. My hands trembled as I held that empty box, staring at them across the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals together. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. My mother just sipped her coffee and said I needed to learn independence, that birds eventually leave the nest. But I wasn't a bird. I was their daughter. My name is Harper, and this is the story of how my parents' cruelty became the catalyst for my greatest triumph. Growing up, I'd always felt like an inconvenience in my own home. My older brother Marcus could do no wrong. Star athlete, straight A student, the golden child who hung the moon. Me? I was the accident, born 7 years after him when my parents thought they were done having kids. They never said it outright, but I felt it in every forgotten birthday, every missed school play, every time they introduced Marcus with pride while I stood invisible beside them. But I worked hard. God, I worked so hard to earn their love. I maintained a 4.0 GPA, volunteered at the hospital every weekend, saved every penny from my part-time job at the bookstore. I thought if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, successful enough, they'd finally see me. I was wrong. The morning of my 18th birthday started like any other. No balloons, no cake, no special breakfast, just my mother's sharp voice cutting through my dreams, telling me to get up because we needed to talk. My stomach dropped before my feet even hit the floor. Nothing good ever came from those words. I found them both in the kitchen, stone-faced and serious. My mother pushed a box across the table toward me, and for one stupid, hopeful second, I thought it might be a birthday present. Then she opened her mouth and shattered that illusion. She said I was an adult now, time to spread my wings. 3 months to find a job that could support me, find an apartment, and move out. No negotiation, no discussion. My father finally looked up then, just long enough to nod his agreement before returning to his paper. The business section, I noticed. Always the business section. I asked about college. I'd been accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship, had dreams of becoming a doctor. My mother laughed, actually laughed. She said that was my problem to figure out now. They'd done their job raising me to 18. Anything after that was on me. The rage that built in my chest felt like fire. I wanted to scream, to throw that box back in their faces, to demand answers. Why Marcus got a full ride to his expensive private college while I got cardboard and a countdown. Why he got a car for his 16th birthday while I got a card with $10. Why he got love while I got tolerance. But I didn't scream. I took the box, went to my room, and made a plan. See, what my parents didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this day since I was 15. Some part of me always knew I was temporary in their lives, like a house guest who'd overstayed her welcome. So I'd saved. Every birthday dollar from distant relatives, every penny from babysitting jobs, every cent from the bookstore. 3 years of squirreling away money like my life depended on it. Because it did. I had $12,000 hidden in a safety deposit box at the bank. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to prove them wrong. The next 3 months passed in a blur of apartment hunting and job applications. My parents acted like nothing had changed, going about their daily routines while I frantically tried to build a future. They never asked if I needed help, never offered advice or comfort. Marcus came home from college once during that time, and they threw him a welcome party. I served the drinks and cleaned up after, invisible as always. 2 weeks before my deadline, I found it. A studio apartment above a bakery, tiny but clean, with windows that caught the morning sun. The owner, Mrs. Chen, took pity on me when I explained my situation. She reduced the deposit and even offered me a job helping in the bakery before dawn. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I moved out on a Tuesday, 2 days before my parents' deadline. They seemed surprised when they came home to find my room empty, my key on the kitchen counter. My mother's face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before. Confusion, maybe a flicker of regret, before settling back into indifference. My father just shrugged and said at least I'd learn to be punctual. That night, in my tiny apartment that smelled like fresh bread and possibility, I cried until I couldn't anymore. Then I got to work. The next 2 years were the hardest of my life. I worked 3 jobs while attending community college, surviving on ramen and determination. 4 hours of sleep became a luxury. I missed Marcus's college graduation because I couldn't afford to take time off work. My parents didn't invite me anyway. They never called, never visited. The only time I heard from them was when my mother needed something. Could I pick up Marcus from the airport? Could I water their plants while they vacationed in Hawaii? Each request came with the same casual entitlement, like I was still their servant, even after they'd thrown me out. But something beautiful happened during those years of struggle. I discovered I was stronger than I ever imagined. Every challenge that would have crushed the old Harper only made this new version more determined. I excelled in my classes, impressed my professors, made connections. When I transferred to the state university on a full academic scholarship, I didn't tell my parents. They'd lost the right to my victories. By the time I turned 25, I'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business. Instead of medical school, I'd discovered a talent for real estate. I started small, flipping a condemned house with a loan that nearly gave me panic attacks. But it sold for double what I'd invested, then another and another. Within 3 years, I owned a small real estate development company. Nothing fancy but profitable. Steady. Mine. That's when I saw it. The house next door to my parents was for sale. It was a modest 2-story colonial mirror image of the house I'd grown up in. Same blue shutters, same wraparound porch, same everything. The owner had died, and the estate wanted a quick sale. The price was below market value, practically begging for someone like me to snatch it up. I stood on that sidewalk for an hour, staring at both houses. The one where I'd been unwanted, and the one that could be mine. 1,000 scenarios played through my head. I could buy it, flip it, make a tidy profit. Or I could rent it out, let strangers live next door to the people who'd made me a stranger. Or I could move in myself. The thought hit me like lightning. Move in next door, show them every single day what they'd thrown away. Let them watch me thrive mere feet from where they'd tried to break me. It was petty, maybe even cruel. It was perfect. I bought the house cash. No mortgage, no complications. Just a simple transfer of ownership that made me their neighbor. The closing was on a Thursday. I moved in that weekend. I'll never forget my mother's face when she saw the moving truck. She was watering her roses, wearing the same gardening hat she'd worn my whole childhood. The hose dropped from her hand, water pooling around her feet as she watched me direct movers with furniture nicer than anything in her house. She tried to speak to me, walking over with this strange expression I'd never seen before. But I just smiled politely and said I was busy. Maybe we could chat another time. The same words she'd used on me 1,000 times when I was young and desperate for attention. Her face crumbled a little and I felt nothing, just cool satisfaction. My father's reaction was more subtle. He started taking his coffee on the front porch every morning, watching as I left for work in my Tesla. Sometimes I'd wave cheerfully and he'd just stare, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Like he couldn't understand how the daughter he'd discarded could afford a car worth more than his annual salary. But the real show began when I started renovating. Top-tier contractors, landscape designers, the works. Every improvement to my house made theirs look shabbier by comparison. I installed a pool. They'd always said pools were too expensive, too much maintenance. I threw pool parties for my friends, laughter and music drifting over the fence while my parents sat in their silent house. Marcus visited them one weekend, and I watched from my window as my mother pointed to my house, gesticulating wildly. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. Later, he knocked on my door. First time we'd spoken in years. He stood on my porch like a stranger, which I guess he was. Time had been kind to him. Still handsome, still confident. But there was something else in his eyes now. Uncertainty, maybe, or guilt. He asked how I'd done it, how I'd afforded all this. I told him simply, hard work and determination. The same things our parents claimed to value but never recognized in me. He asked if I was happy. I said I was content, which was more than I'd ever been in the house next door. Then he said something that surprised me. He said our parents talked about me constantly now. Wondered where they went wrong, why I wouldn't speak to them beyond basic pleasantries. They'd rewritten history in their minds, painted themselves as loving parents who'd simply wanted to teach independence. The cardboard box became a gift of freedom in their retelling. I laughed, not cruel, not bitter, just genuinely amused at their delusion. I told Marcus the truth, that they'd gone wrong the day they decided one child deserved love while the other deserved tolerance. That they'd gone wrong every time they'd made me feel like a burden in my own home. That they'd gone wrong when they'd handed their teenage daughter a box and a deadline instead of support and guidance. He left looking troubled. I didn't see him again for months. The seasons changed, and with them came a shift in the neighborhood dynamics. My parents aged seemingly overnight. My father retired early, spending his days puttering around a house that suddenly seemed too big. My mother's garden, once her pride, grew wild and unkempt. They moved like ghosts through their daily routines, while I lived vibrantly next door. One winter evening, during a particularly severe storm, their power went out. I watched from my warm, well-lit living room as they fumbled with flashlights. The old Harper would have rushed over to help. This Harper made herself another cup of cocoa and continued reading her book. But karma has a funny way of teaching lessons to everyone, not just those who seem to deserve it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face illuminated by candlelight through her window. She looked so old, so fragile. Nothing like the imposing figure who'd ruled my childhood with indifference. By morning, I'd made a decision. Not forgiveness, I wasn't ready for that. But something else. Grace, maybe. Or just the exhaustion that comes from carrying anger too long. I knocked on their door with a thermos of coffee and a basket of fresh pastries from Mrs. Chen's bakery. My father answered, looking haggard and cold. His eyes widened when he saw me, then filled with something I'd never seen directed at me before. Hope. I didn't make a grand speech or demand apologies. I just handed him the basket and said neighbors should look out for each other. The words felt strange in my mouth, but not wrong. He took the basket with shaking hands and invited me in. Their house felt smaller than I remembered, older. The furniture I'd once thought so grand seemed worn and dated. We sat at the kitchen table, that same table where they'd handed me a box and shattered my world. But I wasn't that scared 18-year-old anymore. We talked about safe things at first. The weather, the neighborhood, my business. They asked careful questions, treating me like a client they were afraid to lose. It was bizarre being the one with power in that house. I dreamed of this moment for years, but the reality felt hollow. Then my mother started crying, quiet tears that she tried to hide behind her coffee mug. She said they'd been wrong, said she woke up every day regretting that morning, that box, that deadline. Said watching me succeed without them was both her greatest pride and deepest shame. My father nodded along, adding his own stilted apologies. They'd thought they were teaching me strength, he said. They'd never imagined I'd take that lesson and use it to build a life that didn't include them. I listened, but I didn't comfort them. Their tears were their own to carry, just like mine had been. When they finished, I told them the truth. That their cruelty had shaped me, but not defined me. That I'd bought the house next door not out of love or hate, but because I could. Because every success in my life was a testament to what I'd overcome, and I wanted them to see it. I also told them that being neighbors didn't make us family. That relationship had been severed the day they'd chosen to be landlords instead of parents. But perhaps, with time and effort on their part, we could be something else. Acquaintances, maybe even friends someday. The relief on their faces was almost painful to witness. They'd expected rage or coldness. They hadn't expected boundaries delivered with calm dignity. I finished my coffee and left, but not before establishing new rules. They couldn't drop by unannounced. They couldn't ask for favors based on old obligations. They had to earn their place in my life the same way everyone else did, through respect and consistency. The months that followed were awkward, but not unpleasant. They kept their distance while making small efforts. My father started maintaining his yard again, taking pride in keeping up with mine. My mother left occasional baked goods on my porch with simple notes, no assumptions, no demands, just offerings. Marcus visited more frequently, serving as an inadvertent bridge between our two houses. He'd finally understood the disparity in our upbringings and carried his own guilt about it. I didn't absolve him, that wasn't my job, but I didn't punish him either. We built something new, tentative but real. One evening, almost exactly 10 years after they'd given me that cardboard box, I hosted a dinner party. Friends, colleagues, chosen family filling my home with warmth and laughter. Through the window, I caught sight of my parents on their porch, watching with undisguised longing. On impulse, or maybe it was finally time, I walked outside and invited them to join us. The shock on their faces quickly gave way to grateful acceptance. They entered my home like visitors to a museum, careful and reverent. They didn't stay long, overwhelmed by the life I'd built without them. But they met my friends, saw my success not as a line on a bank statement, but as a room full of people who chose to love me. When they left, my mother hugged me for the first time in a decade. It was awkward and brief, but it was something. That night, as I cleaned up after the party, I realized the victory I'd sought for so long had transformed into something else. I'd bought the house next door to prove a point, to show them what they'd lost. But somewhere along the way, it became less about them and more about me. I'd thought revenge would taste sweet, and for a while, it had. But the real satisfaction came from building a life so full that their absence became just another fact, not a defining wound. Living next door to them had started as a daily reminder of their rejection. Now it was simply where I lived, in a house I'd earned, surrounded by a life I'd chosen. They say the best revenge is living well, and maybe that's true. But I learned something better. The best life is one lived for yourself, not in response to others' failures. My parents had given me a cardboard box and a deadline, thinking they were ending my story. Instead, they'd given me the beginning of something extraordinary. Every morning I wake up in my beautiful house and choose what kind of day I'll have. Sometimes I wave to my parents as they tend their garden. Sometimes I don't see them for weeks. The power to engage or withdraw is mine now, and I use it thoughtfully. They never became the parents I'd needed at 18, and I never became the daughter they'd wanted me to be. But we became something else, neighbors who share a property line and a complicated history. It's not a fairy tale ending, but it's real. And that's enough. The cardboard box they gave me sits in my home office now, holding important documents and memories, a reminder of where I started and how far I've come. Sometimes visitors ask about it, this plain box among my nice things. I just smile and say it was a gift from my parents. In a way it was, just not the kind they'd intended.